Likely.
Yeah, so these players are definitely both playing for it. The winner will likely advance to the top eight. The loser will definitely not advance to the top eight. So the pressure's certainly on here in the last round of Swiss and Fort Wayne.
Dylan Bryan begins with two unknowns. The active unknown is obviously something that you do not want to begin with, just because it's very difficult for you to get him out of the active position, and you always want to get him into the bench so you can discard him and draw an extra card. Unfortunately for Frank, though, he also has a pretty poor start with that Shaman, who you always want to begin with in your hand, obviously.
Yeah, that's Shaman EX. You start with it. You can't use setup. You can use Sky Return, of course, return it back to your hand, but definitely not your ideal starter, especially in a deck as aggressive as Frank's.
Exactly. He does get a couple of darkness energies into the discard pile, I believe, and that's one thing you do want to see. Obviously, Frank has a lot of energy recursion with Dark Patch and also the Yveltal non-EX. I like to call him Baby Yveltal. He basically
Yveltal
can,
small, according to
yeah,
Josh.
Yveltal small according to Josh. There's plenty of different ways to call him, but at the end of the day, what you like to do with that Yveltal is bring the energies back with Oblivion Wing and kind of set up your late game with him, as well as deal a little bit of damage here and there.
Absolutely. Not to mention, speaking of bringing back energies, the thing that really makes Frank's deck tick is that Dark Patch, only available to the expanded format. Lets you just take a Darkness Energy from your discard pile, attach it to one of your Dark Pokemon on your bench. So Frank's deck is just an aggressive energy acceleration deck. You do see he has the Hoopa there to fetch out all of his EXs, including his one of Seismitoad.
Yeah, Seismitoad is a Pokemon that's very easy to just kind of splash into your deck, no pun intended. But you can easily put him into the deck and then just start Quaking Punching away because it's a double colorless energy at energy cost. And you already play the double colorlesses for the Yveltal anyway. So if you can slow your opponent's game plan down, you definitely will. And in some matchups, it's actually even just game breaking to attack with it on turn one and just not let your opponent set up with items, for example, like the Blastoise matchup.
Yeah, definitely. There's just not a huge cost of throwing a Seismitoad in your deck. You're already running the double colorless. You're already, Quaking Punch is one of the best attacks in the game, and definitely not the focus of Frank's deck. Like we said, it's kind of a more aggressive, wants to lean on Yveltal a bit, but totally a reasonable call. And it looks like an N resolves, and Frank's debating dropping a Keldeo EX. Keldeo has a really neat interaction. You can see Frank using his first attachment to the Keldeo. That's going to allow that Keldeo to rush in with its ability and then retreat thanks to Darkrai's ability, Dark Cloak.
Exactly. Keldeo is an interesting choice here, especially because he used the energy attachment onto that Keldeo. That's something you don't normally see out of Darkrai players. They tend to want to attach energies to their Yveltal, make sure that they can start attacking early on. But he decided to just go for a little bit of control here, and he slows his game down quite a bit. But at the same time, it comes at no real cost, and the Shaman goes to the bench, and now the Hoopa becomes the active Pokemon.
Yeah, that play was just to kind of protect the Shaman, smaller HP Pokemon. You send up the Hoopa. The Hoopa's not going to get knocked out this turn. Dylan does need a turn to evolve into the Vespiquen, so you're just kind of setting up the Hoopa and saying, if you can do damage somehow, do it, that's fine, but I'm going to protect my Shaman. And like we said, Frank can rush in and retreat basically any time unless that Dark Energy gets removed from the Keldeo.
Exactly. And that seems very unlikely for it to happen. Now, at this point, you also have Dylan, who's got no slouch of a start himself. He just goes with an Ultra Ball. Remember, he wants to put as many Pokemon into his discard pile as he can. He did discard a teammates with that Ultra Ball, so that's something that you can definitely look to try to Versus Seeker up into your hand at some point if you're not in a Quaking Punch lock, because that's one great way for him to be able to keep the double colorless energies coming.
Absolutely. So the whole point of Dylan's deck is to just dump as many Pokemon into that discard pile as possible and fuel Vespiquen's attack, be Revenge. He also has a Flareon, has a very similar attack, just called Revenge. So yeah, that's what we're going to see early here, is just dumping some Pokemon in the discard pile. It looks like Dylan has fetched a Wobbuffet off of an Ultra Ball, which is interesting. That could tell me if he's going to retreat into it. That could tell me that he's got a little bit of a slower hand and wants to stop Frank from using those abilities.
Yeah, that's a very interesting play to make, especially when Frank. I guess it's a good play to make when Frank does have something like a Keldeo with the Darkness Energy already attached. You kind of want to make sure that your opponent's Hoopa stays in the active position for as long as possible. At the same time, the Wobbuffet isn't really aggressive at all. So for Dylan to actually just spend his entire turn doing that was a little bit interesting. But at the same time, I can definitely understand if his hand is a little bit slower.
Yeah, the problem is, as you can see on your screen, that Hoopa has the 2 retreat cost. So as long as that Wobbuffet's active, Frank is basically forced to either find a switching card, which I'm not sure if he plays, and he looks like he plays one copy of Escape Rope, or manually attached to it and have to pay to retreat. So it's just kind of I think it's a statement by Dylan saying, like, now you have to deal with this. You sent up this Hoopa rather than having the Shaman up now. I'm going to buy some time and prevent you from doing what you want to do.
Exactly. Now, Frank does play another N, and that's going to give both players a fresh hand of 6 cards. I believe Dylan's hand was only a couple of cards, which included like a Ultra Ball. But at the same time, it's irrelevant now because he's got 6 new cards to work with, as well as Frank.
And if you look on Dylan's bench, you can see an unusual card in Life Dew. Life Dew is an A spec, so Dylan has chosen to play this card over Computer Search or Dowsing Machine or some of the more popular ones. And it's a Pokemon tool, and what it says is when your opponent knocks out this Pokemon, they take 1 less prize. So it's attached to a Combi now. If Frank were to knock out that Combi, he would take 0 prize cards.
That's a very powerful A spec. It's been powerful since the card actually came out. But at the same time, you give up a lot of your versatility with Computer Search or Dowsing Machine, which are the 2 most popular A specs. So it's definitely it came at a cost to Dylan, and we'll have to see if it'll actually pay off. It seems like it does. It seems like it's actually a very powerful card, but at the same time, if he's ever got it in his hand stranded and he has like a dead hand or something like that, you have to wonder, was it worth it?
Oh yeah, there's definitely some question to, whether you can really afford to even attack with 7 Pokemon, whether you can really have the resources to do that. There's some question about what are you losing if you're not playing Computer Search, but, Dylan getting ready to hopefully try and win this match and make the top 8, it's certainly served him well, so it's certainly something to think about.
A Battle Compressor from Dylan. Remember, this is the card he wants to see. He wants to see as many of it as he can. It helps him out a ton. It helps him get Pokemon into the discard pile to feed the Be Revenge. It helps him get supporters into the discard pile for the Versus Seekers. It's basically a jack of all trades that just happens to be extremely good in the Vespiquen deck.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just one of the most powerful cards he has. You see him discarding a bunch of stuff that he's not gonna want here. Still has that Wobbuffet active. I think it's interesting because now that the Wobbuffet's active, it's kind of who's the first to strike. Is Dylan going to retreat the Wobbuffet and attack into that Hoopa, which will grant him prizes, but is not necessarily one of the more useful cards in Frank's deck? Or will he try and wait and make Frank make the first move?
Yeah. Now, another Battle Compressor here for Dylan is going to finally get him as many Pokemon as... Well, basically, he's going to need for the rest of the game, with the exception of knocking out the giant EXs. But when it comes to knocking out Shamans and, for example, Seismitoad and Keldeo, who happen to be weak to Grass Energy, to Grass Pokemon, I should say, they're going to be more than there's going to be more than enough Pokemon in the discard pile, I should say.
Yeah, definitely, and you can see one of the strengths of Battle Compressor as well is. Yeah, Dylan's getting rid of Pokemon, but he's also getting rid of some cards he just doesn't need, like that Enhanced Hammer that he doesn't think will come up too much in this matchup.
That's a very interesting discard to make. Enhanced Hammer's not a dead card in this matchup. There's always the double color synergies. I guess he's afraid of being Quaking Punch locked, but at the same time, it's one of those cards where it could definitely prove to be a fruitful card.
Yeah, it is a card he can play, which sometimes when you see players discarding non-Pokemon or non-energy cards at Battle Compressor, they're just cards that won't be turned on in the game. So it's an interesting call, but I think he's going to be relying on doing one-hit KOs for the entire match and hoping, and just he doesn't think it's going to be too relevant, especially as you said, if he gets Quaking Punch locked.
That's fair. Now it's on Frank. Remember, the Wobbuffet is just stopping Frank from. Well, I spoke too soon. The Wobbuffet does go to the bench thanks to a Lysander, a timely Lysander, which actually activates the Eevee with the double color synergy attached to it. If Frank can take advantage of, which I have no doubt he will be able to, he'll be able to not only knock out this Eevee, but also secure himself in a great position. And there's a double Dark Patch also onto the Darkrai. Darkrai now has 3 energy attached to it, and it will no doubt be able to Night Spirit's way to a big knockout on this Eevee.
Yeah, and we see, Darkrai has kind of fallen out of favor as far as attackers go. It's kind of mostly in the deck for Dark Cloak ever since Yveltal was printed and just kind of redefined what darkness power is. However, that Night Spirit attack, super strong. Never count a Darkrai out. You see he's knocking out that Eevee and putting damage on that Combi.
Down with that Eevee. Combi has 30 on it. Remember, it's the Combi without the Life Dew. Now, there's another Battle Compressor. That's either the 3rd or the 4th of the game here for Dylan. He's actually debating on playing it. I don't know how many Pokemon he has in the discard pile, but it's got to be getting close to a knockout on Darkrai. Well, actually, maybe not, because it looks like he's going for just a grass energy instead of the double colorless energy which he had in his hand. So he's not going to be going for a Bee Revenge here.
Yeah, and you can see the dikes that are on top of Dylan's deck box on the right. They're kind of construed, but those are trying to tell how many Pokemon are in the discard pile.
I can't even tell how many.
Yeah, I can't really read them either, but that's the idea.
Got you. It looks like there might be like 6 or so. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Definitely don't want to give you guys misinformation here either. It's just, once again, it's going to be very difficult for Dylan to really knock out this Darkrai. Darkrai is one of those Pokemon which Dylan struggles a lot to knock out.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the bigger HP Pokemon can be harder for Vespiquen, but that's kind of the name of the game too. You know, Vespiquen wants to exchange prizes like that. They want to be able to knock out EXs, while when Frank's taking prizes, he's likely going to be taking prizes on non-EX cards, or in the case of Life 2, he's going to be taking no prizes at all. So I imagine
Looks like there might be 14 Pokemon in the discard pile.
That's quite a lot. Looks like we're going to see an intelligence gathering, drawing Dylan back up to 6 cards in hand. The not an attack you see a whole lot of the Vespiquen decks.
Yeah. Intelligence Gathering does deal 10 damage to the Darkrai, which it's not insignificant, but it's pretty close.
Yeah, just mostly used to draw your hand back up, but that 10 damage probably won't be too relevant here.
Keep in mind that Dylan did bench that Entei too.
Yeah, that Entei is an interesting one. Not something we've seen a whole lot. It's proved Dylan well on camera earlier. It made some good moves for him, but it's definitely been one of the more interesting cards in Dylan's deck. And actually, Dylan's deck is pretty interesting. You know, we've seen a lot of Vespiquen decks. You know, Jimmy O'Brien won the Lancaster Regionals last week with Vespiquen, but Dylan has an interesting take on it, running that Entei. He has that Life Dew and a few interesting choices.
Exactly. Will Entei prove to be useful in this matchup, though?
I'm not sure. I think it'll depend on overall on his board position. Like right now, you can see he has the Vespiquen that's going to get knocked out, the Combee, and then the Entei doesn't have any EVs or Flareons. So I think it can just act as kind of a, not as good of a Flareon, but just another attacker if it comes down to it.
That's fair. Now, remember that Darkrai will be able to knock out this Vespiquen with basically absolute ease. Vespiquen has 90 hit points, and Darkrai does deal 90 base, but obviously it has a muscle band attached, so it'll deal a little bit of extra damage as well. And that 30 extra damage will be relevant. The 30 damage will probably go onto the Wobbuffet, I would assume. Maybe even that Entei. It doesn't really matter at that point.
Yeah, that's one of the most powerful things about Night Spear is just the 90 damage up front, 30 on the back end. You know, Frank has choices here. He can put it on the Combee and just soften the eventual Vespiquen up. But it looks like he's actually going to go...
That's a big play by Frank. He actually went for the Hypnotoxic Laser in order to actually knock it out with a Seismitoad instead. Vespiquen goes down, and Seismitoad becomes the active Pokemon. It does not have 10 damage on it, and you're going to be forced to actually attack with a Vespiquen, Bee Revenge, in order to knock this Seismitoad out, which is going to let the Darkrai knock out that Vespiquen instead. Yeah, that's a big play by Frank.
Yeah, so what Frank is saying by doing this, he's just going, okay, I'm going to do damage. I'm not going to do the maximum amount of damage I can do, but I'm still going to knock out that Vespiquen of yours. And I'm going to say, you know, if you were relying on getting your Vespiquen with an Ultra Ball next turn or anything like that, you're not going to be able to do it.
Dylan is in dire straits. Yeah, Dylan's in dire straits, and he was forced to draw only 2 cards with setup on his Shaman, but he drew the right card there. That was a Vespiquen, which is going to now let him attack. It's going to let him knock out the Seismitoad. But this is coming at a big, big cost. The Vespiquen will get knocked out immediately after.
Yeah, and the Vespiquen will get knocked out, and it's unfortunate that Dylan doesn't have any EV or Combee on his bench. But
he does have an EV now.
Oh, he doesn't have an EV now. I apologize. So the Vespiquen getting knocked out is fine, right? So it's nothing Dylan would ever want. You know, obviously you want to win the game without any of your Pokemon getting knocked out, but that's the Vespiquen has kind of done its job. Additionally, Frank won't be even taking a prize for knocking it out. So it's almost like the Vespiquen was 3 prizes worth of value, which I think is totally fine from Dylan's standpoint.
Exactly. I don't disagree with you. I actually think you're entirely correct. I was looking to see if Frank might play something like a Xerosic or something like that. That is sometimes played in in this deck, but he does not. He doesn't have a tool scrap or anything along
Yeah,
those
no
lines.
way to remove that tool.
So that life dew will stay there until the Vespiquen does get knocked out.
Yeah, and so, Dylan's definitely in a nice position here. I'm not sure of the contents of his hand, but if he can attack with a Flareon next turn for the knockout on the Darkrai, he will get into 2 prizes, just needing 1 more EX knockout to win the game. And
he does still need the double colors. I don't know if he has it in his hand quite yet. It's not easy to get. You can get a blacksmith instead with a Flareon. But once again, it's not like these things are givens, right? You
Right.
With a small hand size, you are not guaranteed to have access to all of these things, and you're going to need access to multiples of them if you want to win the game.
Right, and we see Frank hit the Vespiquen with a Hypnotoxic Laser. Both players are going to review the discard pile of the others and just check what's been played, check how many of each card their opponents might have left, and checking their own discard piles even to just make sure double check what they've played already.
Seems like Darkrai is the main Pokemon here for Frank. He does not want to give it up without much of a battle. Even though it seems like he might be forced to attack with it on this particular turn, I'm not convinced. He does go for the laser though, which is an interesting play.
Yeah, so Darkrai's Night Spear would knock out the Vespiquen either way. So would basically any attack by Yveltal.
Yveltal EX, yeah.
Yeah, Yveltal EX.
Juniper here from Frank. He seems to be looking for something. I'm not exactly sure what he's exactly looking for, but he seems to be looking for something. And his hand just actually gave him energies and Lysander. So not exactly what he had to be looking for there.
Yeah, we see a big Juniper drawing 7 cards, but I'm not sure if there's anything too relevant. I think what he could be trying to do as well, because we did see him get that Yveltal Small, is to take some dark energies, put them in his discard pile, and then try and dark patch them onto that baby Yveltal and attack with that and kind of get some value off of the Vespiquen. It wouldn't be a guaranteed knockout, but the Vespiquen is asleep, and it would make it so that when Frank does knock out the Vespiquen, if Dylan responds, he'll only be knocking out a non-EX.
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to work out in his favor, though. He has already attached. Oh, I thought he'd already attached, so actually he just gets to attach to the non-EX Yveltal there.
He's trying to dodge bullets here. Frank is going for the basically the plan, hoping that he does not wake up, and he does not wake up. Dylan does not wake up from that hypnotoxic laser sleep flip. I don't believe Dylan has a way around that. So now the Vespiquen will stay knocked out, or will stay asleep, and if that is the case, he's going to be knocked out at the end of his own turn.
Yeah, and that'll be huge. Again, the Vespiquen will be knocked out going into Frank's turn, forcing Dylan to promote something to probably get knocked out. I mean, one of the advantages of using that Oblivion Wing last turn was that, not only does Frank take a kind of a less risky play in a way, but he also gets to put a Darkness Energy from his discard pile onto that Yveltal and kind of just build up more attackers. Now he has a Darkrai that has all the energy it needs and a Muscle Band with only 1 damage on it. He has an Yveltal with a bunch of energy on it and a Muscle Band. So Frank's definitely got some attackers waiting in the wings.
Yes, he does, and this ended up being a huge play for him because now his EX is no longer in danger. The Vespiquen won't be able to attack, so it's not like he's going to lose anything there, and he's now going to be able to get the first attack on a Dylan's Pokemon. This might be the little edge that Frank needed here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're gonna see some interesting lines here. It definitely seems like Dylan is in kind of the rebuild phase. He has that Flareon. He needs to get some energy for it, or a Blacksmith. Another attacker would be nice. He's debating playing another Eevee. He really needs to find a way to react to these attacks by Frank. But again, because of the prize exchange between non-EX and EX Pokemon, it's certainly possible.
Dylan does not really have a way around this. He's going to go with a Blacksmith in order to actually get some energy attachments onto the board. I'm going to assume he's probably going to activate a Wobbuffet or something along those lines at the end of his turn. But even then, the Wobbuffet just gets knocked out.
Yeah, I think sending up the Wobbuffet is fine. It's going to prevent Frank from retreating into something to knock out the Wobbuffet via Dark Cloak.
Remember, Frank does have that Lysander in his hand, so he'll
Oh,
probably...
he has Lysander in hand?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So he'll probably just Lysander up that Shaman.
Yeah, he can definitely Lysander up the Shaman. He could also just Lysander up the Flareon.
Yeah.
Knock out his attacker, knock out the attacker that Dylan spent a Blacksmith on. It's going to depend on the rest of contents
Frank's
of his hand and deck, and just seeing how the rest of the game plays out. And there is that Wobbuffet as predicted.
The Wobbuffet comes into the active position. Frank does have that Lysander in hand. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes for either of those plays. The Shaman is a little aggressive in order to get yourself a couple of prizes now while the Shaman's still in play. Another obvious play would be to go after that Flareon. Since he does have an EV in play, the Flareon choice is maybe not the most enticing one, but at the same time, I mean, if you have to go through it, you have to go through it. You might as well go through it before he gets to attack you. I'm not convinced as to what the right play is, but I'm sure Frank is going to find it.
I think the Shaman
Frank is also debating himself, but he eventually shows up with the Flareon.
I was going to say, I think the Shaman play would be more relevant if Dylan had another EX on the board, because then Frank can set himself up into a position where he can knock out the Shaman EX, take 2 prizes, and then in the next turn or further in the game, knock out another EX. But given that Dylan doesn't have any other EXs and is very unlikely to play one, I think Frank's going to go ahead and take the time, knock out this Flareon, and really put it on Dylan to have another attacker for next turn.
The Flareon will go down to that Darkrai. Darkrai is going to put an extra 30 damage onto any given Pokemon, honestly.
This is actually an interesting choice. I imagine the Eevee.
The Eevee makes a little bit of sense here. Remember that the baby Yveltal is being powered up, and it deals 100 base damage. So honestly, I don't know how much it matters. I would have probably put it on the Wobbuffet or the Shaman, but it's not that big of a deal.
I think the hope here is just that if Dylan couldn't get anything next turn, couldn't evolve the Eevee, he would Frank would just be able to knock it out by Night Spear damage. But we see Dylan does promote the Eevee.
Yeah. Frank does have the win here if the Eevee does not evolve. He'll be able to Lysander up the Shaman and Night Spear knocking out both the Shaman and the Eevee. That's if there's no evolution. That's a big if. And honestly, if there's no evolution, then the game's pretty much over anyway.
Does he have a Lysander in hand?
You know what? No, he already used it, right?
Right.
I think he might have a Versus Seeker, though.
Okay. Yeah, this has been a really interesting matchup. I really like these back and forth type matches we've seen. We've seen a few Night March mirror matches and Night March versus Vespiquen, and certainly this Yveltal deck's a little bit slower, but it's interesting to see kind of the back and forth prize exchange that happens. And there's
the
Flareon.
What a hand from Dylan. He actually had the double colorless, a Sycamore. That's why he was counting his deck. He was making sure that he was given enough turns if he Sycamored, and he does actually. I believe he still has 1 card left in his deck. More importantly, though, the man just is going to be able to knock out this Darkrai and have a large hand to be able to potentially close the game out next turn.
Yeah, definitely. It looks like he has plenty of Pokemon to knock out this Darkrai. Now he's just considering what to do with the rest of his cards. Only one card left in his hand, but he can take that Versus Seeker for the end. He can fix that just fine. And now he's back into this game.
One of the big things though is I don't see an evolution in Dylan's hand, and I only see 1 card left in his deck or something along those lines. So maybe he won't have a backup attacker after this.
Yeah, he does.
He does have the double colors, but he just doesn't have a Pokemon. That is a knockout onto that Darkrai, though, and he's going to be able to pick his 2 prizes. The first one's the obvious Lysander. The second one, he goes for the Ultra Ball here. Maybe his deck size is larger than 1.
He also could find the last Vespiquen. I don't know if he's used them all. I haven't seen the contents of his discard pile, but we'll definitely see Frank taking a minute to investigate.
Due to that town map, we have absolute perfect, or at least Frank has absolute perfect information as to what's going on and as to what he has to deal with. I'm sure that Frank is going to count how many Vespiquens are in the discard pile, and he's going to play accordingly. Remember that there is no free retreat until the Darkrai gets played. Darkrai does get played. We see a double colorless get played onto that baby Yveltal, and a Versus Seeker. He did have it in hand. Will that Versus Seeker find him an end?
Looking, yep, and he takes the N. He knew that he knew Dylan had the Lysander in hand, so he just has to play the end. No other supporters are going to help him as much as N does right now. In addition, it does put Dylan down to 2 cards. In addition to getting rid of the Lysander, it does, reduce his hand size a bit. Reduces Frank's too, but he's about to take another card off the prize.
Yeah, so Frank is going to go down to a 3-card hand, but he will knock out that Flareon. Baby Yveltal is also a single prize, which is big for Frank. Remember that right now Dylan does not want to knock out that Yveltal. He wants to knock out the Yveltal EX on the bench, or pretty much any Pokemon on the bench, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And the contents of both players' hands after this end is going to be really important in dictating
We see a Lysander right away for Dylan. He needs a way to actually knock out the Pokemon, though. The Lysander on itself is not enough, and I think the other card is an N.
There's a Dark Patch from Frank. Considering dropping the Darkness onto the Darkrai, but maybe reconsidering to put it onto the Yveltal just to have in case anything goes wrong. He has a huge attacker in that Yveltal. Doesn't really get punished for it either.
No, he won't get punished for that at all. He does have that Yveltal EX with a ton of energy on it, and now that Baby Yveltal is going to knock out that Flareon, it's going to be able to attack on the following turn, and they're both down to 2 prizes apiece with 2 cards in hand for Dylan. Remember, the 2 cards in hand are Lysander and N for Dylan.
Who's Lysander and N? Okay, interesting. So Dylan still has some work to do. He has to find an attacker and the energy.
The Shaman EX would be, that's a very, okay. He also top decks an Ultra Ball, so now he has an Ultra Ball, a Lysander, and an N in hand. He counts his deck, I believe that's around 7 cards or so. He finds a Vespiquen.
Here's the N. All right, so it's going to go to 2.
N to 2. Remember, the Shaman is active. It does not have free retreat right now.
And for those of you wondering how Dylan had 3 cards in hand, he did have a Propagation Execute in his discard pile, so he just kind of shortcut that. He probably said to Frank, I'm going to use Propagation, and just discarded 1 card off the Ultra Ball.
Tricked me for about 20 seconds. I was like, wait a minute. What's going on here? Remember, the Shaman EX is in the active position. I'm not sure why he put the Shaman EX active. Do you? Do you know?
I imagine it's just because he thought that he didn't know he was going to draw the Ultra Ball, so he thought maybe I draw a DCE and Sky Return. But yeah, that's not what's going to happen, and it looks like Frank Diaz is going to take Game 1 over Dylan Bryan.
That does make sense. At the same time, though, your opponent now no longer needed to draw a Lysander there, so it was a risk for Dylan, and it did not pay off. He could have taken the risk of going for the Combi, and then drawing the Vespiquen or an Ultra Ball or something like that, and then ending himself into a double colorless. That could have definitely happened. It didn't end up happening though, and because the Shaman was active, he had no way around a loss there.
Yeah, definitely, and interesting thing about this matchup is that Frank was just in control basically the entire time. It was certainly close, it came down to the last few knockouts, but it seemed like it was always Dylan kind of struggling to get back into the game, whereas Frank was just, I have a Darkrai, I have an Yveltal, I'll attack with this baby Yveltal.
Take 90. Take 110,
exactly. He was just very in control, whereas Dylan had to rebuild every turn.
Yeah, that's the problem with these non-EX Vespiquen decks. As strong as their attacks are, their hit points are very, very weak. They're only 90 hit points, which is very easy for these big EX decks to knock them out with. So once you get an EX attacker and they kind of slow your board down to the point where you can't attack back, you're just going to get steamrolled.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dylan, one game down, going to have to win 2 games in a row in order to make the top 8 here. Frank just needs 1. And as an update to the tournament, I did, 1 minute after we sat down, I saw Ross Cawthon standing around. So it's possible that Ross and his opponent, Simon Drew, they were on 30 points each. So we thought that they would have to play it out, but it may be possible they're just taking the coin flip, hoping to draw in at 31. Which it leads to some interesting things for this tournament, seeing how they could have drawn themselves into 9th and 10th. Or
I think that if all the 30 pointers drew in, then one of them is going to draw themselves out. Right. I think that's the way it works out. I can't remember anymore, and honestly, I don't want to put too much stress onto the math. But at the same time, it is definitely a risk, and if they drew, then they just kind of have to hope.
Yeah, for sure. And it looks like our players are getting ready here, so let's go ahead and head down to the match for this Game 2.
Remember, one of these players has to win. A draw is no good for them, which puts a lot of pressure on Dylan because he has to win 2 complete games here. Frank only has to survive this game to be actually win the match.
Yeah, definitely. A draw is basically as good as a loss. You know, it will put them in a better position for points and other prizes, probably lock the top 16 for them, but that's not what either of these players wants. They're aiming for the top 8. They're aiming to take the title of regional champion.
Oh, yeah. Both of these players are previous regional champions, I believe, so I have no doubt that they're both going to try to add to that trophy case.
Absolutely. And it looks like Dylan's just going to go ahead and drop 2 EVs on the bench, attach to that Wobbuffet, and pass the turn to Frank's Keldeo EX.
So that's a slow start for the EV player, for the Vespiquen player. However, Keldeo cannot, retreat easily here, especially with the Wobbuffet active. So it's definitely going to be a slow start for Frank as well.
Yeah, it looks like Frank has a computer search. He has some options in his hand, but he's definitely going to need to get that Keldeo out of the active position as soon as possible, especially because it's weak to grass. So look, there's no threat of Vespiquen next turn, but definitely something to consider. Both Seismitoad and Keldeo are pretty easy Pokemon for Vespiquen to knock out.
So this is Frank's ace spec. This card has to do a lot of work for Frank here. He's got the escape rope actually shuffled to the top of the deck. That's one way for him to get out of that active position, and one way for him to actually get the Wobbuffet out of the active position as well. So it can do a lot of work here. It looks like that's what he got, and that's a good use of your ace spec. If you only have access to one computer search, you might as well make it worth your time.
Yeah, definitely. He has plenty of other things that are going to draw him cards here. Looks like he has a Shaman EX that he can use. If he draws a draw supporter off of that, that's fine. And so hitting that escape rope, the one-of card in his deck, is just really important.
Yeah, remember also that the Eevee is not like it's a very durable Pokemon, so you can definitely see the Eevee go down here to an Oblivion Wing attack. The escape rope is going to bring that that Yveltal into the active position as well as the Eevee, and now Shaman is going to draw him 6 additional cards with setup. This is a great start for Frank, and it looks like I'm eating my words immediately when I said he's not going to have a very aggressive start.
Well, that Shaman for 6 tends to do that.
Yeah, Shaman for 6 as well as a computer search for the escape rope, which actually ended up being what allowed him to just kind of go nuts.
An Ultra Ball. Frank takes the Darkrai side. It looks like no energy attachment for the turn.
No,
oh, he has the end, right?
Yeah, he still has an end. He has not played a supporter
right, okay.
yet. So that's going to be 6 additional cards that Frank's going to be able to see. Remember, Frank's bench is already completely full. He does have that Seismitoad in play one more time. Seismitoad did play a big role, even though all it did was attack once.
Oh, yeah, it attacks really efficiently. It cuts Dylan off of playing his items. It's definitely risky. As we said, Vespiquen is grass type, Seismitoad is weak to grass, but it definitely has its place, and Frank used it masterfully last game.
That's exactly right. Now, 6 additional cards for each player. That's actually 6 new cards for Frank, because Frank had a 0-card hand after that, and he's still looking for an energy card. I don't think he got it, actually. He was looking for an energy card to even be able to attack at all, but it does not seem that Frank got it, so he might be out of options here for the rest of his turn.
And that was one of the downsides of playing the Darkrai, is that Frank now doesn't have access to maybe Ultra Balling something away to find a Shaman to draw some cards, and it looks like Frank will have to pass his turn without attacking.
Yeah, that's a big turn of events here for Frank. Frank wanted to put a lot of pressure on that Eevee, but now instead, Dylan gets to draw his card for the turn, and Dylan can definitely take advantage of this right away. Plays Unknown and uses Farewell Letter in order to draw himself an extra card. Does it again. That's an extra couple of cards right there. He does have a double colorless in hand.
Yeah, definitely. Those Farewell Letter Unknowns just perfect for this deck. Drawing you cards, Pokemon that you can start with, fueling your revenge attacks. Just great. Couldn't have printed a more perfect card for the deck.
Yeah, we see an Ultra Ball here, discarding a Vespiquen and a Sycamore, I believe. Finds him a Combee. He does want to get some sort of attack going here. Remember, Yveltal does not have that much hit points. It's very realistic that we'll be able to see a knockout here from Dylan. And actually, he goes for the Execute instead. And Ultra Balls one more time. Now finds a Combee.
Yeah, decides to get the Combee this time. Going to be nice to build up that Vespiquen on the bench. What did he take with the last Ultra Ball?
He got the Execute.
Okay.
And then he discarded the Execute with this Ultra Ball.
Perfect.
So now Combee goes down with a double colorless energy. That means that the Eevee is just kind of going to be a sitting duck right there. He decided not to try to risk going for a big attack here. And now Battle Compressor is going to get him 3 more Pokemon into the discard pile.
Yeah, looks like he's going to go ahead and take an Unknown, that Mr. Mime, and an Entei.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Those seem like good Pokemon to just kind of put into a discard pile. They don't seem very relevant here.
Yeah, no bench damage besides Darkrai, which could be relevant.
Sometimes
Um,
it is, but at the same time, it's one of those things where your Pokemon get knocked out so easily anyway. I don't mind. I don't mind seeing it go to the discard pile.
and Dylan knows he only has so much bench space between trying to play EVs and Shaymins. He might have to play Vespiquens, things like that.
Yeah, you do have to get a lot of Pokemon into your discard pile, so you have to make a lot of sacrifices in these cases. And it looks like Mr. Mime was one of the first sacrifices to go. He is. Oh yeah, he has just been told to put the deck back in the.
Yes, the
correct
pass
spot.
of the turn from Dylan has to leave that Flareon stranded active, and now let's see what Frank can do.
Frank Lysander there, and now he draws the darkness energy. He has the muscle band. The Combi is going to go down. That happened again. Remember last time the Eevee went down with the double colorless on it. Now this time it's going to be the Combi with the double colorless. Only
Yeah.
a Flareon and only an Eevee in play that can attack the following turn. But more importantly, a big double colorless down for Dylan.
Yeah, absolutely huge. He already has one double colorless on the Lava Vet. One's in the discard pile now, and we see Frank favoring attaching to that Keldeo again. He has the play of being aggressive and attaching to one of his attackers, or attaching to the Keldeo and giving himself a little bit more utility, and that's what he's been choosing in the early turns in both games.
So Dylan does not seem to have the knockout quite yet on that Yveltal, even with Flareon's Vengeance attack. However, he does have to get some sort of aggression going. You can't just let your opponent run you over like that. You can take it for a little while, but definitely not forever. And Life 2 can only do so much work whenever you do draw it.
Absolutely, and we see the Flareon becomes active, and looks like Dylan's going to go ahead and attach, trigger the Eevee's ability to go and find a Flareon. So now, sitting with two Flareon, one, I suspect one is not long for this world, but the other remains safely on the bench.
Ultra Ball discarding one card and the Execute in the discard pile. We'll find him another Combi, and now a Colress is going to draw him 8 cards. That's 8 desperately needed cards. He did have a double colorless in hand, but he didn't want to use it quite yet. He wanted to just energy evolve with the Eevee's power ability. Finds a Life Dew.
And there's a Life Dew going right onto that Flareon, so it's going to cut off Frank from drawing a prize if he does manage to knock out that Flareon anytime soon.
Notice how he actually went after he put the left ear on the Flareon with the energy instead of the active Flareon. He wanted to make sure that no matter what, he's going to be attacking with that Flareon. So whenever he does attack with it, it will not give your opponent a prize when they go for a return knockout.
Choosing to give up the active Flareon and just admit that that's happening, but hopefully have this Flareon on the bench give him a little bit more value.
And remember, it's not even a given that Flareon's going to go down. Frank doesn't have any energy in play besides the one on his baby Yveltal and one on Keldeo. So in order for Frank to actually knock out this Flareon, he's going to need some sort of card combination. It's not a given yet.
Still has some work to do, for sure. And Frank reviewing the discard pile of Dylan, just making sure what's been played, making sure what he has to worry about. Gonna go ahead and check a third time just to be certain.
Very often you find yourself looking for a specific card, then once you see that it's there or whatnot, you put the discard pile back down, and you're like, wait a minute, what about this other card then? So
Absolutely.
That's kind of what ended up happening to Frank multiple times there. Now a double colorless will be attached to a Shaman rather than like a Seismitoad or something along those lines. At this point, it's got to be about bench space and just securing a better end game for himself, as well as maybe drawing himself out of potentially poor cards right now.
Yeah, it looks like he's going to go ahead and put that Shaman back into his hand, both protect it from a potential knockout and let him use that setup ability next turn.
Yeah, if he definitely chooses. Now the Vespiquen does come down. Finally, we see an evolution for Dylan here. Remember, he still has a double colorless in hand, so he can always start attacking with that Flareon. He doesn't have to stop. And let's see, Dylan does play a Battle Compressor, so that's going to be potentially 3 more Pokemon that go to the discard pile. At that point, you're starting to fear for your life if you're Frank, because you're starting to see some big hits from these Stage 1 Pokemon.
Definitely. And the other thing to notice, as we've been talking about all weekend, we're sitting here, Dylan's down on prizes, Frank's up 1 technically, but Dylan is going to be taking prizes at a faster rate than Frank, especially given that Life Dew. So it's just going to be every turn that passes, every time that Dylan can get more Pokemon in the discard pile, he can get more energy on his Pokemon in the field, he can get more Pokemon set up. He's just presenting much bigger threats than Frank is.
Now, I'm not 100% sure, but it looks like there's about 14 Pokemon in the discard pile for Dylan right now. And if that's the case, he's dealing 160 damage with Vengeance. Not quite enough yet, but he's getting there. And now a Colress here for Dylan is going to draw him 8 additional cards. Colress is getting really, really big in certain matchups.
Oh, absolutely. And those 8 cards seem like it's going to be the majority of his deck. Doesn't look like he has too many more than that. Maybe 5 left. I'm gonna go ahead and review his discard pile. And yeah, I mean, this Colress is just one of the most missed supporters from Standard, I think. You know, Colress for 8 here, not even the maximum you can do, not even close to the maximum you can do if either player happens to be playing Skyfield.
This is big. This is an Ultra Ball that's going to discard not 1 but 2 Pokemon from Dylan's hand. And if he did have 14 Pokemon in the discard pile, that's going to be 16, which means that Vengeance will be able to knock out the Darkrai EX. That's if my math is correct, or if at the very least, if Dylan's dice are correct.
We do see that he has the double colorless in his hand as well, so that Vengeance is going to be turned on.
That was a big Ultra Ball. That was a big actual Colress for Dylan. It found him exactly what he needed. He needed a couple of Pokemon and an Ultra Ball in order to do this. And now, not quite sure what's going on there.
I think he was just battle compressoring for a battle compressor, taking nothing off of the Ultra Ball, just thinning his deck out to as few cards as possible.
Got you. So now we do see that double colors go into that Flareon. That makes me believe that now that's going to be a knockout into the Darkrai. The Darkrai does go down. 2 prizes taken by Dylan. He finds a Versus Seeker, or he finds an AZ and a Versus Seeker here. Or no, he goes for the Fire instead. Dylan is now 2 turns away potentially from winning this game. Remember, time is an issue, guys.
Yeah, definitely. Like we said before, a potential draw here is not good for either player. It essentially eliminates them from making the top 8 of this tournament, which is really what both players are wanting. And we saw Dylan took the Fire Energy and the AZ from the prizes there, just wanting to guarantee that Fire Energy can go on the bench Flareon for a Vengeance next turn.
What Frank wants here is probably an N and a way to attack. That's asking a lot out of his hand, but that seems to be what he needs. Seismitoad would be a fine attacker right now. He just actually needs to get like maybe a muscle band or something along those lines in order to actually be able to knock out this Flareon. But remember, he does want to end his opponent out of this hand, because it seems like Dylan's hand is just stacked.
Yeah, definitely. An N would be great for Frank here. Not sure what his outs to that are. He's really struggling with energy here. You see he only has an energy on that Keldeo and that Yveltal, as has been the case for a few turns.
Yeah, he's been struggling with energy a ton. Has found no dark patches, has found no real energy recursion here. And now it's finally going to start hurting him. Double Colors does go onto the Keldeo, so that's one way for him to get a knockout here. Keldeo, rarely an attacker, but Secret Sword does deal quite a bit of damage to these Flareons. Matter of fact, it knocks him out.
Oh yeah, even on base 50, it's going to do 100 after weakness. A
wow.
Totally reasonable attacker versus these water weak Pokemon.
So now he had to Juniper here. He did not have any type of way to manipulate the hand, and now he's finally going to battle compress here for himself. A little late, but at the same time, he can afford to give up 2 more prizes if he can get some dark patches going. But he has to actually get an end going on the following turn, as well as have an attacker ready.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, especially as, you know, even when Frank takes his prize, he's going to go down to 4 prizes. The next Pokemon that he knocks out is not going to give him a prize in that Flareon. So it could just be that Dylan's too far ahead. However, Dylan will need to find at least 1 more attacker to finish off the game.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to necessarily be the case given Dylan's hand. Dylan, I mean, he has quite a bit of resources. He does have that Fire Energy in order to actually attack with Flareon next turn. But remember, he needs more than that. He does need to knock out 2 more Pokemon, not just the Keldeo. So if Frank can secure a better end game for himself through potentially ends and stuff like that, then he might still be all right. It'll be close, but it seems like it's doable. And he had a laser there. The laser does put the Flareon to sleep. He might be going for that Yveltal strategy again, but no, this time he chooses not to. He actually just Secret Swords and knocks out that Flareon. Vespiquen becomes active because it's got free retreat.
Yeah, the Yveltal wouldn't have been able to knock out the Flareon unless there had been a Verbank City Gym in play. So Frank's deciding just to go ahead and take the Keldeo, or take the knockout with the Keldeo rather. And there's a second fire energy onto the Flareon. We saw Dylan take that with off of his prizes. Sounds like time didn't call for a regular match. This match is a few minutes behind, so they do have a few extra minutes, but it's not going to be many.
It seems like it's got about 5 minutes or so left. Flareon does knock out that Keldeo. 2 prizes left for Dylan. Frank still has 4 left. Frank doesn't have to win this game. He just has to avoid losing it. Frank, however, though, it seems to have his back against the wall. Now, at this point, he can knock out that Flareon with the baby Yveltal. Hope his opponent doesn't have a Lysander there, but that's wishful thinking.
Yeah, definitely. This is going to be right down to the wire. But Frank, now it's interesting. It's almost like the opposite of what I said last time. After last game, I said, oh, Frank has to constantly, or sorry, Dylan has to constantly rebuild. Frank's just going through the motions. But now it's the total opposite. Frank has really struggled to get anything online here, where Dylan has just been running over him.
And now Frank is finally getting some dark patches going. He's going to put some energy onto the benched Yveltal EX. Remember, he wants to end his opponent here. He really does, but I don't know if he has those cards, access to that card. Hypnotoxic Laser is tails, so the Flareon does not fall asleep. Not too relevant, but he's finding a way. He does have the Versus Seeker. The Versus Seeker is going to get him that end. He's going to go down to a 4-card hand, but Dylan is going to go down to a 2-card hand. Remember, there's no way for Dylan to attack currently. Dylan needs to find a double colorless energy in order to attack, and a Lysander in order to just flat out win the game.
Absolutely, and this is one of the ways that Frank can win. Regardless of how unlikely it is, this is the first step if Frank is to win this game.
So
and Dylan down low, he doesn't draw anything. Frank draws well off of it and continues to sweep for the rest of his prizes and the match.
Dylan goes down to a 2-card hand, but he only has something along the lines of like a 7-card deck. Needs a Lysander and a double colorless to actually win the match. If he has a teammates, then he'll be able to get the double colorless, but not the Lysander. Knocking out the Yveltal will not do him any good here. It'll be like basically just giving Frank another turn. Yveltal does knock out that Flareon. Down goes the Flareon. Down go 2 fire energies. Remember, he cannot take a prize due to that life dew on it. Almost took the prize there. Now, heads, he does get to actually keep attacking with that Yveltal.
It looks like he flipped a tails.
Oh, well, I don't know how to read.
So he's not going to be able to attack with that Yveltal next
Does he
turn.
have what he needs here? Does Dylan have what he needs? It doesn't seem like it. He's immediately going for the discard pile. Time might have been called. It seems like if it hasn't been called yet, it definitely is close.
I don't believe time has been called, but it is coming right down to the wire. Judge is going to go ahead and rearrange Frank's prizes just because he did see which one it was when he accidentally took it off the life dew. It looks like Dylan's going to go ahead and Versus Seeker for potentially a Lysander here.
Remember, the Versus Seeker is not enough. He actually needs to have a double colors to go with it. He Lysanders up a Seismitoad, apparently.
Yeah, Seismitoad is the Pokemon with the highest retreat cost. Just Dylan does need to, or Frank rather, would just need to attach 1 energy to use Dark Cloak's ability, but we could see Dylan ending his turn by promoting that Wobbuffet, which looks like what he's going to do, protect that Vespiquen.
That's a big play by Dylan. He's actually just activating the Wobbuffet in order to stop Dark Cloak's ability from being active. So now the Seismitoad is going to be stuck in that active position, and it's going to give Dylan a few turns to try to find his way out of this, unless Frank has a Lysander here.
And it looks like Frank's taking his time thinking about what he has. I imagine if he had the Lysander.
I really want to know how much time's left in this match. It seems like there's not very much time left at all, if any. And remember that Frank needs to lose this game in order to actually have the game go to a tie. Otherwise, it's going to be Frank that it just wins.
And we're getting word there's 2 minutes left in the match. So not a whole lot of time. It's kind of do or die here. If Dylan ends up winning, it's very likely that the game will end in a draw, which will be quite unfortunate for both players. So Frank's back is against the wall here.
2 minutes left in this match means that they each potentially have 1 more turn, depending on how long Frank's turn goes. This is big. This actually just gives Dylan about 3 turns to take those final 2 prizes. Remember, Frank wants to activate that baby Yveltal if possible. Now Frank is going to attach a double colors. He didn't have the Dark Energy, or he didn't have the Lysander, I should say. He does have a Versus Seeker, though, actually.
Yeah, he's going to go ahead and take the Lysander with the Versus Seeker after attaching to that Seismitoad.
So yeah, I guess he just didn't have a Dark Energy or something like that. But he goes with the Lysander. Lysander's up anything. It doesn't really matter at this point. He's going to be able to actually Quaking Punch here afterwards. And remember, Dylan is not going to have access to any type of items for the rest of this turn.
Go ahead and take
Audino.
that Audino. So now, because Frank is in the position he's in where he's up a game and time is so close to being called, he is just kind of playing not to lose here. You know, pushing up that Audino with the Lysander, just hoping that Dylan has no way to finish the game here.
Dylan draws a card with Farewell Letter on Unknown. Remember, Dylan needs to not only get a double colors to attack, but he needs to get the Audino out of the active position. He does play an AZ. He doesn't necessarily have it yet, though. And now we see a Blacksmith onto that Flareon. We now have a way for Dylan to actually take the final 2 prizes. He just needs to be able to attack with it. Now it's on Frank. Dylan does end his turn. If time hasn't been called yet, then it definitely will be.
Passing of the turn with the Audino active. Frank, I believe, drew a double colorless for his turn, and I believe time has just been called.
Yeah, I think I just heard the little buzzer, so time just got called. Frank is turn 0 here, which means Dylan is going to be turn 1 and turn 3. 2 turns left for Dylan to win this game.
Yeah, so it doesn't appear that there'll be any way for Frank to actually win this game. He only has this turn and 1 more turn. He has 4 prizes left, no EXs on the board for Dylan.
Remember, Frank doesn't care about that. Frank just does not want to lose the game.
Right.
If Frank loses the game, then they end up in a draw, and both players are out of the top 8.
Yeah, exactly. So really, really tough position to be in. So Frank is just in a weird position where he's just kind of, like I said, playing not to lose. But Dylan does have outs. Dylan does, he just needs a double colorless in order to retreat that Audino.
Yeah, double colors to retreat the Audino. Now Frank can actually just play a little dangerously if he wants to. He can definitely retreat the Seismitoad and knock out the Audino with the Yveltal if he likes. Or actually just retreat the Seismitoad and pass. That's one potential play by Frank. But that would still require a Lysander from Dylan and a way for the Audino to get out of the active position. I actually kind of like that play a little bit more.
Colress is coming down.
Colress here for 7 for Frank. That's going to bring Frank down to a very few cards left in his deck. But remember, he only has this turn and 1 additional turn to play the game out.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's pretty likely that we'll see that Audino just be left active by Frank and just kind of force Dylan to have it, assuming he can't knock out the Flareon because he's used a Colress this turn, not a Lysander.
Yeah, if I'm Frank, though, do I retreat and bring up the Yveltal? And maybe just like Oblivion Wing or something like that? I think I do. But at the same time, I'm not Frank, and Frank is ultimately going to be the one who makes this decision. It does depend on what he draws here. Ultimately, all he wants to do is just survive. He needs to survive for 2 turns in order to win this match.
One of the issues with retreating into the Yveltal is that you do knock out the Audino, so now instead of making Dylan have the...
Well, I guess you just don't attack, I meant.
Oh,
yeah, because he does have Muscle Band, so he would be able to knock it out. So you just don't attack.
And that's what Frank is going to do. Just retreat the Seismitoad, send up the Yveltal, pass the turn. And
Dylan does not seem to have it because he's just looking at his hand afterwards. He has a Versus Seeker, I believe. Remember, this is Dylan's turn 1. Dylan has 1 additional turn after this one. He has a powered-up attacker. He just needs to attack. He does not want to attack onto an Yveltal, though. He wants to attack into an EX.
And this will be Dylan's second to last turn of the game.
Versus Seeker by Dylan. What is this Versus Seeker going to find him? It looks like it's going for a Lysander. The Lysander is going to bring up that Seismitoad again, but remember, he actually can just Dark Cloak out of there if he wants to. He just has to attach that Darkness Energy and retreat back to the Yveltal. At this point, he needs a Lysander again, and he needs a double colorless energy.
So it looks like Frank's going to go ahead and pass turn. This is the last turn of the game.
It does not seem like Dylan drew it. Dylan only drew a fire energy. He needed the double colors.
And that's
Dylan
it.
extends the hand. That's the end of the game. Dylan does not get to win this game. Game 2 ends in basically a non-game, and game 1 is the only one that counts. Frank Diaz ends the match up 1-0 and is now going on to the top 8, assuming his tie breaks hold up.
Yeah, 31 points. Yeah, should be fine. We're not quite sure. It depends on how a few things break. But Frank definitely happy to win that match, putting himself in the top 8. Yeah, just after his top 8 performance last week, second place performance last week, just another incredible finish by Frank Diaz, really proving that he is one of the game's greats. Oh,
not only is he one of the game's greats, but he does it in just classic Frank Diaz fashion, where he finds a way to come up with a win out of nowhere. In this position, he just seemed to be so disadvantaged.